In summer 2021, an apparently long-simmering feud between American Picket stars Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz went public. Frank Fritz's unexpected stroke stunned fans. But could it have been more than just misfortune? Behind closed doors, long-standing rivalries, cryptic clues, and sealed court documents hint at a more sinister truth. Fritz told his son that his falling out with Wolfe, whom he's known for more than 40 years, began very quietly, admitting, now explosive evidence presented by Mike Wolfe shockingly ties Pawn Stars Rick Harrison to what may have been a calculated setup. With tensions escalating and new revelations emerging, this saga isn't over, it's only getting started, and the truth might be more shocking than anyone imagined. Frank Fritz's collapse. Frank Fritz was once half the heart of American Pickers, bringing charm, knowledge and a rough around-the-edges vibe fans loved. But in 2020, everything changed. After over a decade on the History Channel, vanished from the show. No farewell, no proper send-off, just gone. At first the explanation was about health. Frank had surgery for his back, took time off to recover, and dealt with weight loss. But soon it became clear, this wasn't just a break, it was a full exit, and it wasn't peaceful. Behind the scenes, Frank and Mike Wolfe, his co-star, weren't speaking. What fans thought was a close friendship had been falling apart for years. In interviews, Frank later revealed the truth. He said bluntly, "We were never friends." That admission shook the fan base. Two guys who seemed like brothers on TV hadn't even spoken in years. Frank claimed Mike had abandoned him during tough times, including when he checked into rehab. That resentment would only grow strong. Then came July 2022. Frank was found on the floor of his Iowa home after suffering a severe stroke. The disturbing part, he had been there alone, likely for days, before anyone checked on him. His condition was critical. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital. He would later be placed under a conservatorship due to the extent of his brain damage. But here's where the story gets darker. Fans immediately question why no one, friends, co-workers, or even Mike Wolfe, had looked in on him. Frank had been off the grid for weeks. No social media updates, no press, nothing. When the stroke happened, his life was completely isolated. That silence raised suspicions. How does someone like Frank, once part of a hit series, end up forgotten? In the weeks after the stroke, fans noticed cryptic social media posts from people close to Frank. One mentioned betrayal, another hinted at knowing what really happened. These vague statements never mentioned names, but they sparked wild speculation. Was Frank being kept quiet? Was there a reason no one intervened earlier? It didn't take long for rumors to swirl. Theories ranged from financial manipulation to intentional isolation. Then came the legal side. In late 2022, court documents surfaced showing a battle over Frank's estate. A longtime friend of his had petitioned the court to become his guardian, citing the need to manage his care and financial assets. The court granted it, placing Frank under full conservatorship. This meant he no longer controlled his own money, property or decisions. Interestingly, one of the documents mentioned that Frank's finances had become unclear during his time away from the show. Some assets were missing, others were being questioned. This added fuel to the fire. If Frank wasn't managing his money, who was and how long had it been going on? A few outlets quietly noted that Mike Wolfe made a brief visit to Iowa after Frank's stroke. Some say it was out of guilt. Others think it was an attempt to distance himself from any fallout. Either way, the visit did little to change the narrative. Fans still felt like Frank had been tossed aside and left behind by the very people he helped make rich. One storyline that hasn't gotten much attention, but should, is a detail from a private collector in the Midwest. The collector claimed he purchased rare antique signage that once belonged to Frank just months before the stroke. The sale was handled through a third party. No signature, no direct involvement from Frank. The question now, who authorized that sale, and was it part of a larger liquidation without his knowledge? This points to a bigger issue. If Frank wasn't in control of his own property, was someone managing it behind the scenes? And if so, did they stand to gain from his medical condition and silence? As the legal fight over his estate plays out in the background, the public still doesn't know the full story. Was it simply a tragic medical event and a sad falling out, or was Frank pushed out, left alone, and then slowly erased from the legacy he helped build. There's no proof of a setup, no direct evidence of foul play, but the timeline is suspicious. The silence around his condition, the quick move to a conservatorship, the missing items, and the broken ties between old friends who once built an empire together. Whether Frank was a victim of neglect, greed, or something worse, one thing's certain. His collapse didn't just leave a hole in American pickers, it opened a floodgate of questions, and no one's given clear answers yet. Mike Wolfe breaks his silence with shocking court proof. Could Rick Harrison really be tied to Frank Fritz's mysterious collapse? Mike Wolfe's secret visits and sudden moves. After Frank's stroke, many fans expected Mike Wolfe to step forward with support. They waited for a heartfelt post, a fundraiser, or even a hospital visit. But what they got was silence at first. When Mike finally spoke up, his statement was short and vague, saying he was praying for Frank and wanted him to get better. For someone who had spent over a decade on screen with Frank, that message felt cold. It didn't sit right with people who had watched their friendship unfold over years. Then things got more curious. A local in LeClaire, Iowa, home of American Pickers' flagship store, claimed Mike had been quietly visiting the area in the weeks after Frank's stroke. He wasn't doing press or public appearances. These visits were under the radar. The question is, why come back in secret? Was it guilt, damage control, or something else entirely? What's even more strange is what happened next. Mike began making quick moves within the business. He started consolidating assets, closing off certain public records, and expanding his solo brand. Within months, promotional materials were scrubbed clean of Frank. The show was now his, a one-man operation. Even old episodes were being repackaged to highlight Mike's role more than Frank's. That speed raised eyebrows. Why was he so quick to move forward? Most shows give fans closure when a major personality exits. Not this time. Frank's disappearance was treated like an afterthought. No reunion, no special episode, just a clean break. And it happened at the exact time Frank was incapacitated and unable to respond. Legal experts have pointed out that during moments like these, when someone loses the ability to speak or act, there's often a rush to establish control over branding and revenue. Had full access to the American Pickers brand. Frank didn't, and with Frank under conservatorship, there was no one to challenge any of the business decisions being made. This isn't to say Mike did anything illegal. Nothing has come out to prove that, but the timing makes it easy to speculate, especially when reports surfaced that Frank hadn't been receiving royalties from newer episodes. Some even questioned whether he'd ever had proper ownership rights to begin with. Behind the scenes, former crew members hinted at tensions long before Frank's health declined. One ex-producer reportedly told a small collectibles blog that Mike had grown very territorial in the final seasons. Frank appeared. According to that account, Mike wanted more control over episode direction, script outlines, and featured locations. Frank, meanwhile, felt pushed out. Some believed that the show's success had driven a wedge between them, a clash of egos made worse by money. To add to the suspicion, there were reports that Frank had started planning a competing show before his stroke. He had even been in talks with a lesser-known network to create a solo series focused on Midwest antique hunting. Emails from his team show early negotiations, but that show never happened. The stroke stopped everything. It's worth noting that if Frank had launched a new series, it would have created direct competition with American Pickers. It might have pulled away viewers, sponsors, and even insiders loyal to Frank. Did someone see that as a threat? Again, there's no evidence, just open-ended questions. Also, court documents from Frank's conservatorship show that one of the first actions taken by his guardian was to request access to business records that included accounts tied to royalties, merchandise sales, and past contracts. Why request that information so quickly? Some believe it's because there was confusion, or maybe even concern about where the money had been going. In parallel, Mike was launching side ventures, new merchandise, exclusive episodes, and even antique tours. His name was suddenly everywhere. Magazines, podcasts, and press. But in all of it, there was no mention of Frank. It felt like a total rewrite of history. The thing fans can't shake is how calculated it all seems. The stroke happened. Frank went silent. And then Mike stepped in to claim the spotlight, rebrand the show and push forward. almost like the timing was too perfect. Was it just ambition, or was there more behind the scenes than anyone realizes? No one's saying Mike caused Frank's stroke, but the fact that he made so many moves right after it, and the way he distanced himself continues to spark rumors. It's not about proving guilt, it's about asking why everything happened so quickly, and who stood to gain the most when Frank went quiet. One thing's clear, Mike Wolfe wasted no time turning American pickers into a one-man empire. And with Frank unable to speak for himself, the full story might never be told. Rick Harrison's name surfaces, just when fans thought the drama between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz couldn't get more tangled. Another unexpected name started popping up. Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars. At first it seemed random. What could Rick possibly have to do with Frank's downfall, or Mike's fast rise? But then came the court whispers. A legal document tied to Frank's estate reportedly referenced a Vegas associate with connections to multiple antique-based reality shows. That raised eyebrows immediately. Rick Harrison is one of the biggest names in that space. While no formal accusations were made, online forums lit up with speculation. Some fans claimed that Rick and Mike had quietly met several times in early 2022. They weren't filming a crossover. They weren't announcing a collaboration. So what were they talking about? Digging deeper, a few independent blogs found an interesting link. A shared business consultant, who worked briefly for both Pawn Stars and American Pickers. This consultant helped coordinate merchandise licensing deals, things like t-shirts, replica items, and collector sets. Around the time Frank vanished from public life, that consultant left Rick's team and joined Mike's full-time. Why does that matter? Because in TV, especially reality TV, the money isn't just in the show, it's in what comes with it. Merchandise, speaking gigs, books and live events often make more than the show itself. If someone were looking to build a media empire around antiques, removing competition and consolidating control would be key. Rick's role becomes even more suspicious when you look at his recent behavior. For years, he avoided joint ventures, but suddenly, after Frank's stroke, Rick started publicly supporting other pickers. He praised Mike Wolfe in a podcast episode, and even hinted at wanting to work with like-minded dealers in a future show. That timing didn't feel random. Some believe Rick saw an opportunity to create a united front, removing older personalities like Frank, and stepping in with Mike to dominate the niche. There's also a report that Rick made an offer on a property tied to Frank's old antique shop. It never went through, but the fact he even considered it adds fuel to the fire. July 2022, Fritz was found unresponsive at his home in Davenport, Iowa, having suffered a serious stroke. One local journalist in Davenport, Iowa, claimed that Rick had actually visited the area in mid-2022, just weeks after Frank's stroke. There's no confirmed record of why he was there. No official filming took place, but it was right around the time legal action was starting around Frank's estate and conservatorship. At the same time, court motions filed by Frank's guardian requested sealed transcripts regarding prior commercial arrangements involving third parties. The identities of those third parties weren't revealed, but in some leaked redacted filings, there was a name beginning with R that many assumed pointed to Rick. Again, this isn't evidence of wrongdoing, but the overlap between timing, money, and connections is too strange to ignore, especially considering the fact that Rick and Mike were reportedly bidding on the same rare Civil War artifact through a private seller. That artifact had previously been on Frank's wish list. Fans believe that more than just friendship linked Rick and Mike. Some are convinced there was a coordinated push to dominate the antique media space, with Frank seen as dead weight. Whether that's true or not, the patterns are hard to ignore. Another twist came when Rick's lawyer made an offhand statement in a local Vegas legal filing about damage to brand reputation due to public speculation. That comment was in response to online rumors, but many saw it as proof that Rick was aware of the talk, and maybe even nervous about what might come out. All of this raises a simple question. Why was Rick Harrison suddenly part of this story? Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe, behind the scenes, a bigger power shift was happening, one that required silence, separation and control. In the world of television antiques, very few shows hold the top spots. Frank Fritz was once a main character in that world. Now he's sidelined, silent, and missing from the picture. Meanwhile,
Mike Wolfe and Rick Harrison are expanding, merging audiences and capitalizing on what's left. Was Rick involved directly? There's no proof. But the moment Frank disappeared from the scene, Rick showed up quietly, strategically, and with interest in properties, partnerships, and artifacts tied to Frank's past. Whether fans believe it or not, his name is now part of the web. And as more court documents come to light, we may find out just how deep that connection really goes. A surprising paper trail leads to Rick. Did he benefit from Frank's silence more than anyone imagined? Mike Wolfe's shocking accusation. The courtroom wasn't ready for what Mike Wolfe brought to the table. After months of silence, cryptic online posts, and behind-the-scenes legal tension, Wolfe finally made a bold move, and it shook everyone who had followed the drama between him and Frank Fritz. No longer just a TV feud, this story had taken a sharp, dark turn. Mike Wolfe walked into the courtroom not as a friend, not as a former co-star, but as a man on a mission. According to court filings, obtained from a source close to the case, Wolfe's legal team submitted what they called key evidence linked to the months surrounding Frank's sudden health collapse. But it wasn't just about a medical emergency anymore. It hinted at something bigger, something far more sinister. The documents reportedly included screenshots, private emails and phone records. Some of these messages showed conversations with names that shocked fans. Not only individuals from the American Pickers crew, but also a surprising third name, Rick Harrison. Yes, the face of Pawn Stars. Wolfe's submission raised eyebrows and questions. Why was Harrison's name even in the mix? What was his connection to the downward spiral that ended with Frank in a care facility? The messages in question, dated just days before Frank's stroke, suggested unusual conversations between Wolfe, Harrison, and unnamed executives. While none directly stated a motive or plan, the tone and urgency of the discussion stood out. Phrases like, "Get this wrapped and he's stalling again," appeared more than once. The court documents redacted many parts, but the timeline alone sparked speculation. Had been fighting for control over some business deals related to the show. Could someone have been trying to push him out permanently? Mike Wolfe didn't stop there. In a follow-up deposition, he suggested that more than one person wanted Frank out of the picture, and not just from the show. He implied financial disagreements, possible breaches of contract and internal battles over show rights. While Wolfe stopped short of accusing anyone of a crime, his phrasing suggested he believed foul play, or at least manipulation, was involved in Frank's downfall. It wasn't just the courtroom that lit up. Fans and amateur investigators online went wild. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForFrank and #RickKnew were trending on social media. A deeper dive into the show's business model revealed something even more curious. Frank had been quietly trying to launch a spin-off. The pitch had been rejected by History Channel, but some claim Harrison had heard about the idea through shared network contacts. One of the most chilling parts of the court revelation came from a voicemail played during the hearing. It was left on Frank Fritz's phone just a few days before his stroke. The message, muffled and incomplete, featured a voice that fans claim resembled Rick's. It simply said, "You should have stayed out of it." No full context, no name mentioned, but when played alongside the timeline, it added a layer of cold suspicion. The voicemail was dismissed by some as coincidence, but others called it a warning. Throughout the legal proceedings, Rick Harrison has denied any involvement, calling the rumors completely ridiculous. However, he has not offered an explanation for his name showing up in Wolfe's submitted records. That silence only fueled more curiosity and theories. Wolfe also claimed that certain medical records related to Frank's care were delayed in being released to his legal team. That led to suspicions about who had access to Frank during the crucial 48 hours after his stroke. Wolfe hinted that decisions made in those hours, including financial authorizations and property changes, were not signed by Frank himself, yet somehow moved forward. Was someone forging documents while Frank lay unconscious? As Wolfe's claims continued to pile up, the court allowed further investigation into Frank's financial transactions during that period. Multiple large withdrawals, property transfers, and account closures occurred shortly after his hospitalization. Wolfe claimed these were completely uncharacteristic of Frank's habits, and pointed fingers at individuals close to both the production and Frank's inner circle. Though no charges have been filed, the judge allowed the inquiry to expand, which means this is far from over. Harrison's ties exposed. Rick Harrison has always played the straight shooter on Pawn Stars, the calm, no-nonsense negotiator who makes tough calls. But his name showing up in Mike Wolfe's courtroom evidence threw that image into chaos. Fans who once saw Harrison as the likable Las Vegas businessman suddenly had a new question. What is Rick hiding? It all started with the digital trail, emails, call logs, and vague messages submitted by Wolfe's legal team. Harrison's name appeared repeatedly, often around the same dates as major turning points in Frank Fritz's life. These weren't friendly check-ins or random mentions. They were tied to meetings, private calls, and business decisions that seemed out of place. While the exact content of the emails hasn't been released in full, fragments hinted at deeper involvement. One email in particular was reportedly sent from a production contact at the History Channel. It referenced a transition plan involving both American Pickers and Pawn Stars. Harrison was copied on it, and so was Mike Wolfe. The timing? Just weeks before Frank's stroke. That plan included streamlining the shows, shifting budgets, and most notably minimizing redundancy in talent. It didn't name Frank directly, but it didn't need to. Anyone following the shows could figure out who that meant. Then came the financial questions. Investigators noticed overlapping business interests between companies associated with Wolfe and Harrison.